Imitators have come and gone, but we gotta pay our respects to the original curator of Japanese animation, Toonami, the great unifier of the youth and self-perpetuating hub for English-dubbed anime. In this video, I'm gonna break down why American anime viewership and maybe our media landscape as a whole just wouldn't be the same without it. Now, you could argue that Toonami was the Trojan horse that brought anime into the United States, and of course you'd be wrong, but close. What it absolutely did do was solidify a place for anime as a top media import into the US and introduce an entire generation, myself included, to not just anime as a vague concept, but to an entire subculture surrounding it, to which it also contributed heavily. And without it, I might be a little more confused that more than one of my friends has a sword guy. But let it be known, it's still very weird. Appreciation for anime in the United States has come and gone in waves for about as long as the style has had a following in Japan. Of course, if you want to start all the way from the beginning, we could look back to the early 20th century at the very first Japanese animation of any kind, but for our purposes, we can start with the first simultaneous wave that began both in Japan and in the West with Tetsuwan Atomu, Mighty Atom, or as he was known in America, Astro Boy. This was the first popular series in the style we now know as anime, and it remains one of the highest selling manga series of all time. Astro Boy's popularity led to a short-lived wave of other anime being adapted for Western consumption, including Gigantor, Kimba the Lion, and my personal favorite, Speed Racer. And while each gained popularity in its own right, with Gigantor serving as a possible inspiration for the American Iron Giant and Kimba for the Lion King, they all had a similar stink to them, a recontextualization process that all but erased the origins of these shows in attempts to make them more palatable for American audiences. As a kid, if I had never been told Speed Racer was Japanese, I truly could have never known. The English dubs of these and other shows changed names and edited content to account for American sensibilities, which in 2018 sounds really bad, but is a practice that persists on some level to this day. The unfortunate side effect being that these shows may have lost some of the connective tissue that would have united them under the anime umbrella. In short, their Western fandoms were separate and ultimately fleeting. And thus the first anime wave of the 60s came and went. Fast forward to the mid-90s, underground anime fandom in the US had returned and reached critical mass, with the release of Star Wars leading to an even greater fascination with science fiction than what was already happening in Japan. Although I'm sure people will say, oh, but Star Wars is actually a space opera. And to that, I'm sure opera fans would say there is no singing. But I guess you can't win with everybody, can you? This sci-fi boom had led to a massive proliferation of the relatively new mecha or giant robot genre in the 80s, fronted by the hugely popular series Robotech, which was sort of cut and pasted using footage from 3 different series. Around the same time, English-speaking fans had begun turning to crude fan subs to get their anime fix. Of course, all this is to say that there was a massive demand for these series that wasn't yet being filled, which means it was only a matter of time before a duo of young, enterprising white men would swoop in to capitalize. So, in 1996, with a deep catalog of Hanna-Barbera programming and almost no budget to speak of, Sean Akins and Jason DeMarco started work on what would become the most influential anime programming block in American history, which is a fact I will happily back up with a strongly worded letter. There wasn't much to set Toonami apart in the beginning, aside from the freedom to do whatever Akins and DeMarco wanted, except anything that cost money. Many of us remember growing up having our anime fed to us by one of the many incarnations of the Toonami operations module, better known as Tom, and I will grant you that according to DeMarco, Tom and his co-host Sarah were part of the original plan for the block, but if it takes the rest of my life, I will spread the good word of anime's original fair use messenger, Militar. Having recently been promoted from his job as director of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, Militar, who I'm sure was probably just tired of Andy Dick, found his new calling as the host of Toonami. The lineup under Militar wasn't exactly what we think of today, starting off with nonetheless popular classics like Thundercats, the aforementioned Robotech, and the original Voltron. This is a period I remember vividly and fondly, but less for its programming and more for the interstitials featuring Militar doing anything from reviewing video games to roasting space ghosts and other heroes. And this period in Toonami's history is significant and will forever hold a place in my heart, but it's not what I'm here to talk about. Explosion Effect, Guitar Riff. In 1999 came the block that solidified Toonami as a media juggernaut. Big. Toonami's new batch of programming included Gundam Wing, Sailor Moon, and the glue that bridges the gap between anime fandom and the mortal world, Dragon Ball Z. That same year, Toonami began airing uncut versions of its afternoon programming on Midnight Run. I still have a distinct memory of my first time hearing Hiroyui saying hell on TV, and just like that, my third eye was opened and there was no turning back. The mature nature of these shows, presumably meant for kids, along with the fact that this was a lot of America's introduction to serialized cartoons, meaning ones that have a continuity between episodes, is what kept people coming back to Toonami well beyond their adolescence. What Toonami did better than its predecessors was give anime the same respect Cartoon Network gave any of its original programming, unlike some would-be competitors who treated it with the same dismissive attitude as my mom, who regularly confused Dragon Ball Z not for Pokemon, but for Pikachu. Specifically Pikachu. Of course, my mom doesn't curate anime programming for a living, and particularly in 1999, Pokemon was already on its way to becoming one of the biggest cartoon franchises in history, anime or otherwise, so it was an understandable mistake. To that effect, Toonami also provided a diverse lineup that gave viewers multiple options to choose from, effectively establishing anime as a style with key visual elements that distinguished it from American animation rather than a genre with limited thematic scope. In essence, Toonami may have saved us years of convincing our parents that anime is more than just colorful dogfighting. If Speed Racer or Kimba had taken off all those years before, we might have had the same problem, but lucky for Disney, they just didn't really stick. Without Toonami, we may have never been exposed to the many subgenres of anime, from mecha to magical girl and all the creepy stuff in between. If you combine that with the representation anime gets in political comment threads, it's pretty understandable if most people think it's just not for them. But even beyond anime specifically, Toonami gave the world a lesson in marketing. The idea of a hosted block of programming isn't new and wasn't at the time. Shout out to Face, the OG, but think back for just a second. Do you even know Face? Like, would you trust Face to watch your dog when you go out of town? No. He's a face. Tom was a friend. One thing Toonami did very well was demonstrate the power of a cultivated experience. If I asked what you're more likely to watch, would you say this random video of me talking about my fond memories, or a video I've linked in the description of my stand-up, which I assure you is very good? The power of a friend's recommendation is something that, through Militar and then Tom, Toonami managed to capture and use incredibly well. They established a level of trust with the viewer that I don't think I've seen captured anywhere else to this day. Beyond just pressing play on great anime, Militar and Tom reviewed video games, dropped music videos, and in Tom's case, lets you try to save his ship and inevitably watch him die, which is just what lasting friendships are made of. Even just the list of games they reviewed is insane. Metal Gear Solid, Sonic Adventure, Final Fantasy VII. I mean, just think about all the music from your youth that you would have missed out on if you hadn't been told by a robot to play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. In fact, just for my sanity, let's break down a few more of the non-anime things you might not have without Toonami. So first off, I'll argue, I think pretty reasonably, that Adult Swim is a direct result of Toonami, and more specifically Midnight Run, the slightly more adult version of the former. I remember staying up late to watch their first run of action anime, starting with Cowboy Bebop, which my cousin was not allowed to watch. One thing neither block gets enough credit for is that both Toonami and Adult Swim have actively curated new music to present to fans, and by doing so have cultivated a semi-underground multimedia empire. It's kind of like an accidental Cartoon Network cinematic universe. In 2001, Toonami aired a special edition of Midnight Run that featured music video premieres for both Daft Punk and Gorillaz. In that run, Daft Punk released 4 new videos produced by Leiji Matsumoto that together are now known as Interstellar 5555. So within only a few years, they were not only introducing America to curated anime, they were also ostensibly producing and airing their own. And considering the significance of that piece in Daft Punk's repertoire, I'd say it's pretty impressive that it started at Toonami, although of course robots are going to look out for each other. Gorillaz have an even more interesting connection. They premiered 3 videos during that special and have obviously gone on to be hugely successful, and they've low-key flaunted their Cartoon Network affiliation on more than one occasion, the most recent of which being that the band's new animated bassist, brought in to replace their recently incarcerated original bassist Murdoch, is Ace, noted member of the Powerpuff Girls affiliate Gang Green Gang, so you can get an idea of how deep these connections go. Fun fact to tie them back even more, I saw the Gorillaz on my birthday this year, and their opening act was The Internet, which is fronted by Sid the Kid, former member of Odd Future, and thus occasional fixture on Adult Swim's Loiter Squad, which you can also imagine was a big part in solidifying Sid and the rest of Odd Future's place in the public eye. So, years later, Gorillaz still maintain a pretty strong connection back to both Toonami and Cartoon Network as a whole. Long story short, Toonami's impact has stretched way beyond just anime by presenting an entire multimedia experience to the viewer, with current trends and pop culture fixtures now inextricably linked back to Cartoon Network, and in capacities beyond the frequent Dragon Ball references and rap music, which I will talk about in another video. So look, I could have pulled a coward move and done a whole video breaking down how Netflix's anime lineup couldn't have happened without Toonami, and that is very likely the case. But more than loose abstractions, I believe Toonami has had a real, concrete impact on who we see in the zeitgeist today. The freedom given to DeMarco and Akins paid off and translated into the freedom we now see on Adult Swim, which introduced us to names like Eric Andre and Tyler the Creator. I think Toonami is an interesting fixture in the streaming age when scrolling through Netflix can leave you so paralyzed by choice that your dog just kind of lies next to you in that way where you're like, does he think I'm gonna die? I think he thinks I'm gonna die. But most importantly, I feel like Toonami helped bridge a gap that was a long time coming between Japanese and American, particularly African American culture, that led to dope shit like this. I'm Yedoye, and this is Getting the Robot, your anime explainer. Also, quick shout out to Maria Meriorito for drawing this great fan art of me. It's just really cool to see that. Just kind of geeking out on my own face. Thanks.